17 the fantasy football season, and his quarterbacks start sits every matchup this week. The first game, Thursday Night Football, New York Jets at the Cleveland Browns. Zach Wilson, if he comes back in this game, he's a sit. He really hasn't done much all season besides one good game versus the Houston Texans a few weeks ago. And Trevor Siemian, he really hasn't done much throughout his NFL career. So going into Cleveland versus a tough defense, both these quarterbacks, whoever starts this one, I don't think doesn't do anything in this one. It's Joe Flacco. He's been playing great football, no doubt about it, the last few weeks here since he's been the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. But now versus former team, the New York Jets, it's one of the tougher defenses he's versed. Season in the games he started is Flacco. But like I said, he's got great rapport with Amari Cooper, who went over 265 yards last week. And Flacco with this week in a tougher matchup versus Jets. If you want to put him out there in the starting lineup with confidence in a championship game or semifinals, you really have confidence in him. But this week in a tough matchup, he's borderline. Detroit Lions at the Dallas Cowboys, the only Saturday game this week coming up here. Jared Goff, it's been a great season for him. And this Lion team, they've really turned things around over the last two seasons, being a team that's been horrible for years in the last place and winning 2 or 3 games and now turning it around. And Jared Goff's got great weapons. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams starting to come on. And this Dallas defense has had their troubles over the last few weeks. So Goff's a start. Dak Prescott has started as well in this one. Dak Prescott, it's been a solid season for him. He's definitely been in the MVP conversation, even though he's not going to win it. Him and CeeDee Lamb have played great football. Him and Jake Ferguson, for the most part, he's gone out there and had a good season. And this week in a potential shootout on Saturday night, he's a start. Tennessee Titans at the Houston Texans. Will Levis or Tannehill, whoever starts this game. I know it's a decent matchup at the Houston Texans, where their defense has definitely given up a lot of points and their secondary's been leaky over the last few weeks. But both these quarterbacks in a big situation for fantasy owners, I just can't trust. So they're both sits for me. CJ Stroud, if he finally returns off the concussion after missing 2 games, I still have confidence to go out there and put him in the lineup. This Tennessee secondary isn't good either. And CJ Stroud, he was lighting the league up before he went out with the concussion. So this week, if he's back, it's a huge boost for this Texan team. And even fantasy owners, if they're still in the hunt here in their fantasy leagues, and they've been streaming quarterbacks over the last few weeks. In this matchup, I think Stroud is a good start. And if you don't start Davis Mills and Case Keenum, one of these guys will be the starting quarterbacks in this game. And they're both sits to me. Davis Mills, we saw a lot of Davis Mills last season where he didn't get much going on, or he would have been the starting quarterback, and they wouldn't have drafted CJ Stroud if he was really putting up numbers. In Case Keenum at this point of his NFL career, he's a journeyman backup guy over the last few seasons, and he just could go in there and manage a game, but he's not going to light up the scoreboard and put up fantasy points. Atlanta Falcons at the Chicago Bears. Taylor Heineke's back in the starting lineup. And this Falcon offense, they definitely ran better last week versus the Indianapolis Colts with Heineke in there. But right now, he's a sit for me, is Taylor Heineke. I got to see more out of him, obviously, to put him in your starting lineup. And this week, he's a sit. I know this bad defense isn't all that great, but the last few weeks, this defense has definitely buckled down and made some plays. Heineke's a sit. Justin Fields a start in this one. Fields coming off a nice fantasy day, 27 fantasy points. And he's been running the football well. As he had a rushing touchdown last week. He threw the football well, Justin Fields. But the other good thing last week as well, DJ Moore didn't do anything in that game. And Fields still went out there and put up a good performance. So right now, this week versus a middle-of-the-pack type of Atlanta Falcon defense, he's a start for me. It's Justin Fields. Miami Dolphins at the Ravens. Could be a shootout for sure, obviously, between these two teams. Until the last couple weeks, I know the numbers haven't been all the way up like they were early in the season, but he had 2 tougher matchups. This week at Baltimore, another tough matchup, no doubt about it. But remember last season, he went out there and put up a big ball game with Tua versus Baltimore defense with that crazy fourth quarter come from behind victory. So this week, Tua was a start. Tyreek Hill, he's not 100%, but he still went out there and made plays versus the Cowboys when he had to. And Jalen Waddle, we don't know if he's going to play in this game. But either way, too, I got confidence this week. Lamar Jackson a start. We know he does it all. We know he's one of the best running quarterbacks of all time is Lamar Jackson. And this week versus Miami, I think he could find ways to make plays. He did versus San Francisco 49ers. And this week, he's a start. New Orleans Saints at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Derek Carr had one of his best games as a New Orleans Saint. last week, where he went over 300 yards and he had a big fantasy day. So this week, a pretty decent matchup at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Even though this Buccaneer team had been playing great football, winning 3 in a row, and the defense has even buckled down, I think, in deeper leagues, 2 quarterback leagues, Derek Carr is a borderline option this week. Baker Mayfield to start once again. Baker Mayfield, you pencil him in at least 20 or more fantasy points weekly. And when you got wide receivers, obviously, on this roster that could go out there and make plays like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Rachaad White, one of the best receiving backs out of the backfield, you're going to put up fantasy points, and the Bucs are going to put points on the board, and that's exactly been the case over the last month of the year. And once again, Baker start. New England Patriots at the Buffalo Bills. Bailey Zapps is sit. Bailey Zapps definitely made this offense better for New England, and they even went into Denver and had a big ball game last week, winning 26-23 as time expired with a field goal. So Zapp has confidence. He's got a pretty decent arm, and I know his receivers aren't all that great. Mario Douglas, Devontae Parker, Juju Smith-Schuster, even though we haven't seen much out of him over the last few weeks here. But right now, he's going out there, Bailey Zapp, and at least competing, but he's just sitting in a tough matchup. Josh Allen, best quarterback in fantasy football. He's a start for me. Josh Allen got great arm. He's got great weapons, and he just goes out there and makes plays with his legs or throwing the football. It just doesn't matter. Josh Allen is a great talent, and this week here versus a defense that's had good game plans throughout the years here. Obviously playing in the division under Belichick. He's still a start every week. Next game, Arizona Cardinals at the Philadelphia Eagles. Kyler Murray, it's been a mixed bag of results since he returned from the ACL injury. And this week here, Kyler Murray, I think, could go out there and have a good ball game once again. This Eagle defense gives up the most yards to wide receivers on the season, and Kyler Murray and this team could put up points, I believe, in this game. We saw last week Tyrod Taylor come in, and he went up and down the field versus Eagle defense, and Kyler Murray this week with a Trey McBride, he could put up fantasy points with him. Michael Wilson, I think, is a decent receiver. Greg Dortch. And we'll see if Hollywood Brown returns as well. But Kyler Murray is start. Jalen Hurts to start each and every week. Top 2, top 3 quarterback the last couple seasons. Broke the rushing record for touchdowns for a quarterback that Cam Newton had. And this week versus Arizona, one of the worst defenses in the league. He's a must-start. Carolina Panthers at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Bryce Young finally had a good game and the best game of his NFL career last week versus the Packers. But still, he's not a quarterback I have confidence in. His weapons aren't all that great. DJ Chark finally emerged last week. Adam Thielen's had a pretty solid season. And Chuba Hubbard out of the backfield. But this week at Jacksonville, even though I know their defense has had lapses over the last few weeks, he's a sit. Trevor Lawrence, if he plays in this game, is a start for me. And Lawrence, he's a gamer, no doubt about it. A lot of injuries this season. Rib injury, shoulder last week, concussion. But he's still going out there. Ankle a few weeks ago as well. He's still going out there. He's making plays as Trevor Lawrence. Last week left with the shoulder injury at Tampa Bay. But knowing Trevor Lawrence and this Jacksonville Jaguar team trying to make the playoffs, even though they've lost 4 in a row, if he's back in this game, if he somehow plays, he's a start. CJ Beathard, he's not going to be a start. He's going to be a sit. This will be a Travis Etienne game all the way in this one if Beathard has to start. And Beathard, we haven't seen much out of him throughout his NFL career, even going back to his days with the Niners where he started some games. Vegas Raiders at the Indianapolis Colts. Aiden O'Connell is a sit for me. O'Connell last week, yes, they did beat the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas Day, was this Raider team. But O'Connell in the second half, they pretty much ran the football the whole time in that one. And this week, I know it's a pretty decent matchup at the Indianapolis Colts where their defense really hasn't stopped anyone. And a few weeks ago, O'Connell had the huge game versus the Los Angeles Chargers. But in a big fantasy situation here, he's not a start. He's a sit. Gardner Minshew is sit for me as well. Gardner Minshew's definitely had a solid season, no doubt about it. But it definitely wears on Michael Pittman if he's going to play or not. It's not 100%. So if Pittman's not going to go, Gardner Minshew's not really a go. But even like I said with O'Connell, if you're a fantasy owner, unless you're in the deepest of leagues or 2 quarterback leagues, you're not going to trust Gardner Minshew as your starting quarterback, and he's a sit for me. The next game, Los Angeles Rams at the New York Giants. Matthew Stafford, the last month of the season, he's really gone out there, and he put up some big points and put up plays. And when you got receivers like Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and now obviously it was Demarcus Robinson really emerging, and Kyron Williams, one of the better backs this season, you're going to put up points. And this week at a weak New York Giant defense that gives up tons of points and has a young defense, I think Matthew Stafford once again goes out there and has a great game. New York Giants, we don't know if it's going to be DeVito going back to him after he got benched in the second half last week with Tyrod Taylor, who came in, and this offense actually moved the football, made it a ball game, losing at the end of that one. But anyway, both these quarterbacks are sits. I know this Ram defense hasn't been all that great this season, obviously, but like I said with other guys in this video, you're not going to trust a Tyrod Taylor or Tommy DeVito to win you a championship in my final game for you this week. So both these guys are sit. San Francisco 49ers at the Commanders. Brock Purdy is start. I know Brock Purdy, he had a crazy game where he just kept turning that football over, and that Raven defense really ball hawked him and put up points in that one. With Brock Purdy, a lot of bad throws, interceptions, batted balls. But this week at the Commanders, I think he gets back on track. I think he gets right, is Brock Purdy. And when you got weapons like Deebo Samuel, obviously, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and CMC out of the backfield, you're not going to stay in a slump for long. And it was just one bad game versus Baltimore Raven defense. That's one of the better units in the league, and they really sent the message in that one. Now to the Commanders, Sam Howell, he got benched in the second half of that game. And obviously in a tough matchup versus one of the best defenses in the league, he's not a quarterback I have interest in starting. I know Howell had a great season and amongst the league leaders in passing yards, but this week he's a sit even if he comes back. And Jacoby Brissett, a long-time backup, but a guy who's had started seasons as well for teams. And Brissett's definitely a good veteran, definitely a good IQ, but this week versus the 49ers, if he does start in this game, it's going to be a long day. He's a sit. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Seattle Seahawks. Mason Rudolph a sit. I know last week Rudolph had a great game. Him and George Pickens were hitting plays down the field, where Pickens went for almost 200 yards in that game. But Mason Rudolph at the 12th man at Seattle, where this offensive line of the Pittsburgh isn't really that good. I think it's going to be a tough sledding ball game for Rudolph. And another guy, like, will you really have confidence in starting him in a big fantasy matchup? I don't think so. He's a sit. Geno Smith a sit. I know he's got great weapons. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, Bigba, but he's just not a quarterback that's been great this season. I know Geno last season was top 12 in fantasy points at the position, but this week he's a sit for me is Geno Smith. Pittsburgh Steelers defense still pretty solid. We saw last week Jake Browning turn the football over 3 times versus them. And this week here, even at home, I don't really trust Geno to go out there and put in a monster performance. Cincinnati Bengals at the Kansas City Chiefs. Jake Browning, he didn't look good at all last week. I know he went over 300 yards, found the end zone once, but he threw 3 interceptions. This defense is going to be riled up and try to make stops and win this ball game after having a horrible loss last week versus the Vegas Raiders. I think Kansas City Chiefs team, they're going to shut down Jake Browning. Aiden O'Connell, for what it's worth, he didn't do much last week. It was the Zamir White show with 145 yards on the ground. And he's a sit. Patrick Mahomes, he's a start in this one. I know Mahomes, the numbers this season haven't been elite. And he's only had one monster fantasy game over 35 fantasy points on the season. So right here, Mahomes, the numbers are down. His receivers are dropping passes. And even Travis Kelce lost a step and dropped a lot of passes as well. But anyway, I think Mahomes can overcome it this week once again. And he's a start versus the Bengals, Los Angeles Chargers at the Broncos, Eastern Stick. He's looked decent over the last couple of weeks, but he's not a quarterback I have any interest in starting this week at the Broncos. I know this Bronco defense hasn't been all that great the last few weeks, giving up 42 points to the line. And last week, Bailey Zapp came into Denver and threw for a good game, but Stick is a sit for me. Russell Wilson, borderline option. Some games he has big weeks as Russell Wilson, and some weeks it's only 15, 17 fantasy points. So this week here versus the Chargers, where I know their defense isn't all that great. So this Charger defense, believe it or not, last week they made Allen work hard, and he had to earn those fantasy points he put up. So Russell Wilson isn't a better quarterback than Josh Allen, and I think the Chargers want to finish out strong and play a little bit better under the new coaching staff. Right now, he's a borderline option for me in the final game of the week. Green Bay Packers at the Minnesota Vikings. Jordan Love is a start for me in this game. Jordan Love, 20 or more fantasy points now over the last month of the season. And it just doesn't matter who's out there. I know they've had a lot of injuries at wide receiver. Christian Watson, Wicks left the ball game as well last week, the chest injury. Tucker Kraft, though, has been playing good. Romeo Doubs having a solid season. Aaron Jones catching the football out of the backfield. And this week in a Minnesota defense that really can't stop anyone, I think Love once again goes for 20 plus, and he's a start. And Nick Mullins a borderline option. Nick Mullins, he's a gunslinger. He don't care if he'll turn the football over 4 or 5 times in a game. He's still going to go out there and try to push the envelope and try to get the football down the field. And when you got weapons like Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, even though he might not give it a go in this one after leaving last week with injury, and also a Jordan Addison who's a good receiver, even though we don't know if he's going to play in this game as well. Nick Mullins, he's definitely a quarterback in the borderline conversation because he did have over 400 yards last week. I know he threw 4 interceptions, but had 2 touchdowns as well and had a good fantasy performance. So that's quarterback start sits every matchup for a crucial Week 17 of the fantasy football season.